Super Sprint was a fun arcade racing game developed by Atari in 1986. In Super Sprint you view a Formula 1 racetrack from above and you race against other opponents, avoiding obstacles, collecting pickups and upgrading your car, and you also use shortcuts that open up on the track. Super Sprint was a popular game found in many arcades, but for me it's probably most notable for the general annoyance it caused arcade managers. The steering wheels used to control the car could spin freely, and it was so much fun to really walk past and give them a shove and spin them. In my arcade that wasn't really normally a problem most of the time, but for some reason in the height of the summer season one of the arcade workers would have to tell some kids to stop spinning the wheels all the time. It was a good game and solidly built, but spinning those wheels was great fun in itself. And if you think about it, some of the games in the arcade were like this. The movement or the physicality of the machine was fun. This was certainly the case with penny pushing machines, or with Outrun's movement, or Operation Wolf's machine gun feedback, and was definitely the case with Super Sprint's spinny wheels. Whittaker's Derby Horse Racer was a popular version of a machine that had been seen in British arcades for decades, and that had been made by many different companies. In the game, you insert a coin, select a horse that you think will win, and in some machines select the odds. After a short countdown, the race begins and you watch as the little plastic horses and the jockeys wobble down the length of the machine. And if it won, you'd get a payout. Again, the real pleasure of this game was seeing the horses move and the interaction with other players when they won or they lost. The winnings were small, enough to perhaps sustain a couple more plays, but the game remains an absolute pleasure to behold. This is the kind of low stakes for amusement gambling that became central to the experience of the arcade, and that is often a source of confusion to international observers. The British arcade is unique as a site of low stakes gambling available to all, alongside the games and amusements that it also offers. And as odd as this is for some, it's a joy to experience in my opinion. Whittaker's Derby remains a pleasure to play, and even though I'd assume I'd not win, it was still a game that I'd watch and play even when there were flashier new video games in the arcade. Monaco GP was an early sit-down driving video game that, like Atari's Star Wars, was a regular sight at the British arcade. It was designed by Sega in 1980, and throughout the early 1980s arcade owners competed to get hold of the machine. The Kane family brought their Monaco GP machine for about £3,000 in 1980, an eye-watering sum of money. But even though it cost so much, David Kane had nothing but praise for it. Some uncharitable critics have seen arcade owners as being people focused on money and the bottom line. In my experience, that is wrong. Sure, arcade owners cared about the money that machines brought into their business, but they also cared deeply about their customers and the games and machines as well. The Kane family loved Monaco GP, perhaps even more than the visitors who played on the machine over the successive years. As David said to me, "It was a fantastic machine, put it on that plinth, and yes, it was worth every penny we paid for it." Chase HQ was a 1988 driving game made by Taito that dispensed with racetracks and race cars in favour of a Miami Vice-influenced cops and robbers scenario. In Chase HQ, you began the game with an urgent radio call from headquarters to track down an escaping criminal. In the first level, it was the Idaho Slasher. You drove a black Porsche-style sports car through the traffic head-on in pursuit of the criminal, while your partner urged you to push the car higher or told you off for bad driving or crashing. Chase HQ was a great game. You felt really cool playing it, and it offered a different kind of play to games like Outrun or Monaco GP. Chase HQ was one of my very favourite arcade driving games. That was, right up until its sequel, Special Criminal Investigation, was released a year later, that included buttons on the steering wheel that allowed your partner to stand up and shoot at the cars and the oncoming traffic. These were wonderful games. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles was a 1989 four-player arcade game made by Konami. It was released to coincide with the British TV debut of the Turtles children's cartoon. It had digitised voices, fantastic sound and four-player co-op. Turtles really was quite an amazing game. I was in my local arcade when the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles machine was delivered. It arrived the same day as a World Cup '90 machine. And once the machines had all been unwrapped and plugged in, I was given free credits to test it out. It was a fantastic game. It became one of my favourite machines in the arcade full stop from that point forward. But even though I loved it, I wasn't really all that good at it. And to make matters worse, it was a coin guzzler. It got really difficult after the second or third level. One day though, a family of day trippers were in the arcade and they were pouring money into the Turtles machine. They let me join in, and then when I ran out of money, they let me have some of their own credits so then we could beat the bosses. And between us, we completed the game. Arcade owners were very proud to have a Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles machine in their arcade, and it was so popular that it would draw passers-by into the arcade where they'd then play for a while and investigate deeper. Sega's Outrun, designed by esteemed Japanese game designer Yu Suzuki, was released in Japan in late 1986 and was found in almost every major arcade in Britain by 1987 or thereabouts. That is, every arcade that could get hold of an Outrun machine. And there were lots of different versions. There's a stand-up machine with a steering wheel designed for smaller arcades, and then there's the whopping and so very impressive deluxe version that we have here. In the deluxe version you climbed into a fiberglass approximation of a Ferrari sports car, and as you drive the whole cabinet angles and banks as you take each turn. You race your Ferrari against the clock through different driving stages that resemble European and North American destinations, and each time you reach a checkpoint there's a fork in the road that allows you to decide which route you want to take. Perhaps you want to drive past tropical beaches with people on windsurfers, or you go past windmills or rocky canyons or even forests. And this game is amazing, and the soundtrack is even more amazing. Now, when I was growing up in rainy, old, boring Britain, the bright blue of Outrun's sky, the sense of speed, the music, the colour, it just felt electric. My friend Philip and I would watch the game, would rarely play it because it was so much more expensive than all the other machines in the arcade, and we'll hum and we'd sing the soundtrack as we'd walk back from the arcade later that day. One day, on the way home from junior school, Philip and I spotted and ran after a Ferrari sports car, like the one from Outrun. And we caught up with it. It parked down the road, and the driver was borrowing the car over the weekend, and he was more than happy to let us sit in it. And we sat in it in awe, and then afterwards Philip and I went down to the arcade and we played Outrun despite the price per credit. And that afternoon, after we'd played that game and we'd seen that car, the game took on a solemn importance for us. Outrun was a hugely popular game, and it was hugely important for me. And it was also a game where hardware prices remained stable, if not even increasing a bit over time. These machines are about as iconic and as desirable as they now come, and for me this game encapsulates just why the British arcade was such a special cultural space. The arcade wasn't just a place to play games. Instead, the games that we played mattered deeply. They changed the way that we understood the world and we understood each other.